what you do is you hire the best guys and gals you can find, the very best people, talent you can find, and leave them alone. Don't tell Mike Mignola how to spot blacks. Don't tell Tim Sale how to tell a story. They know what they're doing. They're going to make you look good. And man, I stole that advice and used it every day.
Lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name is Ryan, and today I got a special guest for him talking to Mark Chiarello, art director, editor, colorist. I mean, he's done so much awesome stuff. He's responsible for bringing some of my favorite projects to light in all of comics, and I'd like to welcome you today.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation to come chat.
Of course, man. Right off the bat, something that I've started paying attention to as a young age were editors and the other people besides just the writer artists, right, that bring comic books to life. Because I love comics and I want to know every aspect of who was able to bring these things to life. And like I said before, that I alluded to, you're responsible for a lot of my favorite projects, which we'll get into in a second. But first, I wanted to ask. I always ask everyone that comes on the show how their love of comics first began. Like, what started that love?
Yeah, I guess everybody has that origin story, right?
Yeah.
When I was a kid, there was the Adam West Batman TV show was phenomenally successful. It took the country by storm, and I guess I must have been 1967, so I was 7 years old. And man, the cliches of running around with a cape, running around with a towel wrapped around you, it's all true. But I didn't realize as a kid that you could actually buy comic books also. I didn't make the connection,
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't until like 8th grade where a friend of mine, my best friend Mike as a kid, he had a couple of Spider-Man comics, and man, I saw them and I just fell in love with them. And it's funny because I was at DC for 26, almost 27 years, but I wasn't a DC fan as a kid. I was a Marvel nut,
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, all the classics. But I saw that in 8th grade, I saw that Spider-Man comic book and I just became a nut for it.
And you're saying you grew up a Marvel guy. So how, when you made the jump from fan to creative or just being in the industry, in general, how did you make that jump and how did you land at DC?
I went to art school in Brooklyn, New York, Pratt Institute. And it was really weird because, I knew what I wanted to be when I grew up. I wanted to be an artist. I wanted to, like in those days, you'd go to the store with your mom shopping, and there was TV Guide, Time magazine, Newsweek magazine, and they were all right there for sale, but they all used illustration on the cover. You had some great illustrators back in those days. And I looked at those and I said, that's what I want to do for a living. I want to draw that TV Guide cover because, like a lot of kids, I was a nut for television.
Mm-hmm.
I watched it 23 hours a day. Columbo and the Brady Bunch and all that stuff. So I went to college. Well, I went to a liberal arts college in New Jersey, and I lasted a week. And I said, I can't do this. I want to be an artist. So I quit and I went to Pratt Institute. I apologize. It's a bit of a long story, but
oh no,
when I got,
that's all good.
Okay, cool. When I got to Pratt, my roommates were John Van Fleet, George Pratt, and Kent Williams.
Wow.
It was weird, man. It was, and the four of us just ate this stuff up, man. We'd go to the newsstand and buy comics and magazines, and we really lived that stuff. We lived illustration, but it also gave me the view that, like Kent, when we were roommates, Kent was drawing comics for Marvel. He was drawing for Epic Illustrated.
Mm-hmm.
And I made the connection, again, because I'm dumb, I never realized, well, somebody draws comic books. They don't just appear. And when I saw Kent doing it, I realized, hey, maybe I could do that.
Mm-hmm.
And Ken introduced me to a guy who became my mentor in the business, one of the gods, a guy named Archie Goodwin.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah, and I Ken introduced me, and Archie was looking for an assistant, a secretary, and I got the job, and man, I've been in comics. That was 30 years ago. I've been in comics ever since.
That's all. Those are some big names right there that you mentioned. So when you decided you wanted to be like, you wanted to be an artist, right? You wanted to be in comics. What was the? Because like I know your work mostly from editing and your art direction and stuff like and I know you colored. I think you colored the first Hellboy story with Mignola, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
What did you want to do in comics when you found out you wanted to be in comics? Did you want to, draw the comics, or did you want to be more of like kind of behind the scenes directing stuff and coming up with these awesome ideas that you did?
I wanted to draw comics, but I'm one of those artists who doesn't have much faith in his own ability. So I sort of always avoided it. I was, I thought, well, I need a job, so I'll be in the editorial side of comics. But I did want to draw. But I kept saying to my friend, man, I'm not good enough to do this stuff. And they were all, my whole professional career, all my buddies are like, Mark, get over yourself. You're good enough. just do it. And I think I'm an old guy now, but I think I finally did get over it. And I'm, now that I'm back to being an illustrator after all these years, I'm really enjoying it, and I'm not so hard on myself. Thank God. But in the interim there, you use that excuse. It's like, well, I have this job at DC. I'm the art director. I'm the design director. I can't go home and do artwork at night because I have kids. There's just so much time in the day. So I kind of wrongly use that as an excuse not to draw. Well, I have a job. I have so much I need to do. It's nonsense.
I do the same thing and I do that also with all sorts of things. So I totally get it. Even though I'm not an artist, I think everyone can relate to that thing where, you got your full-time job, so that's your excuse to not really go after something that is not even to make money, but just that makes you happy. Something.
Yeah, absolutely true. And unfortunately, I think I've been real lazy over the last year, but I'm using the same excuse everybody's using. Man, it's COVID. I can't go anywhere.
Yeah. See, I in the beginning of COVID, I was kind of like that. I'm like, well, I got to really do anything. But I started watching a channel on YouTube, and it kind of motivated me to like, well, I already have a website. Why not do a YouTube channel? I have so much time on my hands where I'm not going to work anymore. I'm at home every day, and kind of what helped me to launch the YouTube channel and podcast. I was talking to creators like yourself, and doing phone interviews, and then I would transcribe them, which was a hell of a lot of work. But this is way more fun, and I think it's way more personable. So I kind of turned something really negative, which was the pandemic and all the other stuff we have going on out here, into something positive.
And I'm finally coming out of it. I'm finally starting to do a lot of work, and I'm in the studio all day long now, which is fun. When you can enjoy drawing, it's so great, because you have that fear. Oh, I don't know how to draw an elbow. Oh my God, it's like. But when you just sit down and do it, once you start, starting's the hard part, right?
Yeah, I agree. I used to draw as a kid, and I wish I could find some of those like sketchbooks that I had, because I'm like, oh, maybe I could draw comics. And I don't even know when it happened. One day I stopped, and I never went back to it. And sometimes I'm like, man, I really wish I would have tried to pursue it a little bit more, or like, who knows what would have happened, right?
Well, I always wonder that, like, if I had not gotten into editorial, and I had been the comic book artist full time, you wonder what my stuff would look like now. I could have burnt out on it. Look, I'm really, really proud of the work I did at DC. It was fun.
Yeah.
I worked with some great people, both on staff and freelancers. Became great friends with a lot of these people.
Like I said, art director, editor, colorist. I kind of wanted to ask, I know what a colorist does. Art directing, though, I don't have as much of a knowledge of what that really entails. I was wondering if you could kind of share what being an art director entails, and maybe some of the projects you had the most fun on in that role.
Sure. Yeah. There's no answer to that. Art director is whatever the job calls for that day. I worked with all the editors nonstop. Like editors were in and out of my office. Hey, so and so drew this cover, but it doesn't look right. Can you tell me what's wrong with it? Because most editors are hired from, their talents are from the writing side, not the art side. And they know something's wrong with a piece of artwork, but they can't verbalize it. Or coloring. I would look at coloring and say, well, here's what's wrong with that. And I would go on Photoshop and I would do a little sketch and they'd go, oh, dude, I totally get it now. Okay, cool. They know what's wrong, but they just can't verbalize it. So then they would go to the artist and say, hey, you're using warm and cool incorrectly, whatever the answer was. So it was working with the editors. It was looking for new talent. It was, going to conventions and looking at portfolios. And, someday I should put a list together of the guys and gals that I am really proud that I discovered. But man, some major, major names that I'm really proud of that I helped them along in their career. That's one of the real highlights. Talking with artists, guys like Tim Sale and Adam Hughes, and hey, why don't you think about doing this or doing that? Just, I found that if you just have a chat with an artist, you just talk with them. It doesn't even need to be about what problem they're facing or how to draw something. If you talk about, like Tim Sale and I are really good friends. And when he was doing Batman covers for me, I would call him and just talk about Norman Rockwell or did you see that new show on Netflix, whatever it was, just to get them jazzed about the creative process. And I wasn't like tricking them or anything because I enjoyed the conversations. But when they get off the phone, they're all jazzed to sit down and draw.
That's awesome.
So it was a little trick, but I don't mean that at all in any negative way. I wasn't tricking anybody. It was good for everybody. And it was certainly fun for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know the covers. Are you talking about the run he did on those Detective Comics covers?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I love those covers.
No, they were great. I colored a lot of those. I wasn't supposed to color, because I was on staff, but Tim would say, Mark, you have to color this one. And I'm like, okay, but just don't tell anybody.
Yeah. So I want to jump into editing too. I personally, I really appreciate, and I can tell a good editor from a bad editor based on the project. Because I can tell when somebody's not really, I don't want to say not doing their job, but I mean, kind of, right? Like your name pops up as, in the editors that I've really grown to appreciate. Shelley Bond, Karen Berger would be some of them, also a couple other ones also. I want to know your opinion. What do you think makes a good editor?
Again, I have no answer for that. I'm going to say something really negative, and I apologize for saying it, but there are not a lot of good editors in comics. There just aren't. So the good ones stand out. You mentioned Karen and Shelley, and Mike Carlin was a brilliant editor. There's some great editors out there, but not a lot. So you're right. You can tell by the books they publish if they're good, if they have a vision. I guess any walk of life, there's good doctors and bad doctors. There's good writers and bad writers.
Right.
So I think the same holds true for editors. And I was lucky because I was the art director and the design director in charge of all the design of all the hardcovers and collections. So that was like a double full-time job. I rarely had time to edit, but I would get an idea in my head and I would go to Paul Levitz, who was then the big boss, and then eventually Dan DiDio and Jim Lee. And I would pitch something. And even though I didn't have time to actually do it, I wanted to do the project so badly because I thought it was a cool idea that I realized I got to, people say that some of the stuff that I put together was really good and really fun, but the secret is I kind of cheated. I didn't have to look, editors have to do weekly comics. Every Wednesday your books are due. So it's a monthly comic book, month after month after month. Man, that's hard. That's really hard to do. I got to come in and, I'm going to do Batman Black and White. It's only 4 issues. It was like, they're making the whole meal. I just make the chocolate cake,
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, you kind of are leading into my next question. So, three top projects that you've worked on that are my absolute favorites: Batman Black and White, like you said, Solo, and I think my favorite, the Wednesday comics.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely amazing ideas, really cool. Somewhere along my moves, I lost my Wednesday comics, and I just got them all back. Um, ordered the originals on eBay. I didn't want the hardcover. I wanted them in the newsprint because to me, that's just the way they were meant to be read.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if we could break each one down, where the idea came from, and what you liked most about each project.
About each. Yeah, no, I understand.
Right.
Batman Black and White was my first editorial. See, I worked at Marvel Comics for only about a year and a half in the 80s. And we did Akira. We did the first translation of English translation of Akira. We did all the
Oh, I
Mobius
didn't know that.
collections. Yeah,
Oh,
they
cool.
were
I didn't.
fun.
That's awesome.
Yeah, but I was just like the assistant on those. Archie Goodwin, the brilliant Archie Goodwin, did those. So then when I got to DC, I went to Paul Levitz and asked him, hey, I have this idea for a black and white book. And I had a real love-hate relationship with Paul. He was a tough guy. You come in with a good idea, and for some reason he'd say no. Every time he'd say no. I wanted to strangle him. He said, well, black and white books don't sell. Our last black and white comic didn't sell. And I was like, well, what was the last black? It was an Omac series by John Byrne. Well, nobody fucking cares about Omac. I was like, Paul, because I'm a passionate Italian artist. I was like, Paul, this is Batman, And he eventually, one day he came down to my office and said, okay, you can do that Batman black and white thing. And I was amazed. Oh, cool. And I had made a list of, over the course of him saying no, 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 during that time, I made a list, if he ever does say yes, what artists, because I'm very art driven, what artists would I call to do these things? And when he said yes, I dug out that list and I called, there were, I forget how many, 20 something names on the list. Every single one of them said yes. I was amazed. It was so cool. So I was really proud. That was my first real editorial, and people do speak pretty highly of it still. I'm pretty proud of that. Solo was interesting because I was talking with Archie one day, and I don't mean to keep mentioning Archie, but I was talking with Archie and I said, man, Archie, aren't you sick of superheroes? I mean, they're great and everything, but it's all we do. And he goes, yeah, but nobody's going to buy Prison Break comics and romance comics. And I said, there's no way to do it. And he said, well, the problem is if you do a series and say, I wanted to do a series and like the first issue was all science fiction stories. The second issue was all Prison Break stories, that genre, each issue is a genre. And he said, well, the problem with that is I may like Westerns, so I'll buy the first issue, but I don't like science fiction, so I'm not going to buy this. So you get no momentum, and sales are obviously very important. So I came on the idea, well, what if it's an artist? Each issue features an artist, spotlights and showcases an artist. And that's what we did with it. And, again, I picked my favorite artists, Darwin Cook and Tim Sale and Richard Corbin. Oh, man. And, if you come up with a good idea, these guys they make you look good. They just do their work. They do incredible stuff. And everybody thinks, oh, he's a genius, but they're doing all the work.
Yeah, but I mean, either way, I think Solo is a brilliant idea. I mean, you said Batman Black and White, just the level of talent that you brought onto these projects, it's phenomenal. Especially like, when I was younger, like I know I discovered probably artists that I didn't know about from Batman Black and White. Even as I got a little bit older with Solo, same thing. Like I don't think I followed every single artist necessarily that were spotlighted. And I think that was a really cool idea. They all did, different stories throughout the book. I mean, it was just phenomenal project.
My two goals with that were, I was really good friends with the great legendary comic artist Alex Toth. We were very good friends.
I know,
man. And
the talent.
He wanted, I was dying to get him to do something for me, and he was a little bit of a curmudgeon and a real pain in the ass. And even though he wanted to draw, I just couldn't get him to draw anything. So I said, hey, I'm doing this new comic and you're doing the cover for it. It's called Batman Black and White. And he was like, oh, I can do that. And he did this great cover. So that worked out. But the other thing was, I kind of wanted to trick readers into expanding their likes and what they see. So
Mhm.
I knew, for that first issue, I put Jim Lee on the cover. I'm not stupid. Jim sells incredible amount of comics. But on the inside, there's a Jose Munoz story. I
Mhm.
guarantee you, 90% of the fans out there have never heard of Jose Munoz.
Mhm.
He's a European artist, and I love his stuff. So you kind of bought it for Batman and Jim Lee, but you got this weird, cool, strange story in there.
That's the best part about those projects. I mean, you know, like I already know, they dedicated the first issue to the Batman Black and White, the new series,
Mhm.
and I think that while it's not necessarily artists I don't know, it is cool to see artists that don't normally work on the characters also as well. Like Tradmore did a story where
Mhm.
I didn't think I'd see him on a Batman book. And then, I mean, it's kind of inspired. I think the Batman Black and White has inspired the Superman Red and Blue that DC is now going to be coming out with, which I think is also kind of interesting. I don't know how it's going to work exactly.
Yeah.
Red and Blue. And then Marvel's kind of copying too, but I mean, DC and Marvel have copied each other for years. So
Sure. No, a friend asked me on Facebook the other day, hey man, you must be really pissed off that they're doing Batman Black and White. I was like, dude, why would I be pissed off? It's comics. It's fun. I didn't create Batman, And,
Mhm.
fortunately, I heard they dedicated the first issue to me, which is really flattering. Oh my God. But I had heard that the guy who was running it, the editor who was running it, is a fellow named Andy Curry. Andy's
Mhm.
got great taste. Unfortunately, he just left DC. But, when I heard he was doing it, I was awesome. I'm sure it's going to be great.
Yeah, first issue was great. I mean, only one issue's come out, but it was really good, and it kind of it reminded me of why I loved the original so much. But let's talk Wednesday Comics. That project, very unique. Nobody's done it since. What prompted you to do that book? And did you edited it too?
Yeah, I did everything on it. Yeah.
Okay, so you did everything on that. So what was it like corralling? That's a large number of talent that you brought to it. Varying, like you had Paul Pope, you had Lieberman. I mean, you had so many awesome creatives on that. I have to know the story behind this.
I live in California now. I moved 6 years ago from New York. DC Comics was in New York forever, and then they moved about 6 years ago.
Burbank, right?
Yeah. And unfortunately, not everybody made the move. A lot of my buddies did, but some didn't. And I was very close with a guy named Joey Cavalieri, who was this
Hmm.
talk about great editors. Joey was one of the best ever. Incredibly intelligent, incredibly creative guy. Me, Joey, and Mike Carlin would go to lunch 3 times a week in New York. And Joey and I share a love of old newspaper strips. When you're a kid, you read the Sunday Funnies.
Yep.
I don't even know if they exist anymore. But he collected them, and I collected them, and we would talk about it all the time. And one of us, and I don't remember which one of us, said it'd be cool if we did something like that. And I won't say I stole the idea from Joey, but it was synergy. We had that conversation a few times. And of course, I went up to Paul Levitz's office, and he said no. Thanks, Paul. Which is funny because once Dan DiDio came in as boss and Jim Lee, I'd go up and they'd say yes to everything I wanted to do. It was totally different, but so Paul eventually said yes, and again, I made a list of who I wanted to work with, writers and artists, and yeah, man, there's some great people, and the thing I liked about it was each strip is a completely different flavor. Science fiction and artsy and pure comics, pure superheroes. It's a little bit of everything.
Was there any like art or creative teams or characters that you wanted to put in there that didn't make the cut, or just schedules didn't line up?
Yeah, the Commandy story, which is certainly one of my very favorites in Wednesday Comics, was drawn by Ryan Sook and written by Dave Gibbons.
Mhm.
Is that right? Did I? I should look it up. I hope I got that right.
I think
It's
so.
funny because I've been out of DC for 2 years now, and I forget everything.
I mean, that's a lot of stuff to remember anyway. So.
Oh man. But Steve Rude was supposed to draw that. I asked him to draw it originally,
Oh wow.
and he was
Okay.
like, "Yeah, this will be great. I'd love to." Steve's a kook. He's a great artist. He's a lovely guy.
Yeah, amazing artist.
Oh my God, I love his stuff. But he was at the time the Watchmen movie was coming out, so Dave Gibbons was going to write it, but he couldn't get to it for like another 2 months because he was doing this press junket for the Watchmen movie. And I said to Steve Rude, "You got to wait 2 months." And Steve got all upset. "I can't wait. My schedule, blah blah blah." So he ended up not doing it because he had other commitments. He wasn't being jerky. He just had other commitments.
Right.
So he never got to be in Wednesday Comics.
Damn, that would have been. I mean, not that Ryan Sook. I mean, I love him too. Not to take anything away from him, but that'd have been really cool to see Steve Rude in there.
Yeah.
Was there any other characters though that didn't make the cut, or everything you wanted to do you were able to put in there? Did the creatives choose the characters? Like, how did that work?
I'm really awful to work with. I'm very dictatorial. And I said, "You're going to do Batman. You're going to do Superman," and they were cool. I mean, Neil Gaiman and I forget everything. Oh, it's Mike Allred. Is it Mike Allred? God, I'm going to insult half of my friends here. But Gaiman wanted to do Metamorpho, but that wasn't a character that was on my list. But what are you going to say no to Neil Gaiman?
Yeah, probably not.
I should have, I should have pulled out these comics before I sat down.
Oh, it's okay. I could have probably given you the heads up that I was going to. That's probably my fault too. So besides those three, what would you say were some of your other favorite projects you worked on?
I mentioned Darwin Cook a little earlier. Darwin's one of the people I discovered, which I'm really proud of.
Wow.
Incredible talent. Holy cow. Oh, the fact that he's no longer with us is such a crime. Oh my God.
I know. But I couldn't believe it when he passed. It was horrible.
God. He did Batman Ego for me. And
another one of my favorites.
Yeah, and that was the first thing he did. And then he wanted to do something else. I said, "Well, why don't you do a Justice League thing?" And he's like, "Only if I could set it in the 1950s. I'm like, "Yeah, okay, cool." New Frontier is possibly my favorite comic book ever. It's such a complete.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful. I mean, people think of Darwin as a great artist. Darwin wrote that too. Darwin was an even better writer than an artist. He was a great artist, but he was one of the great. I think he's the greatest writer / artist. Certainly that I ever worked with, but in comics.
Yeah, he did Selena's Big Score too. He wrote Andrew, that one, right? And then he also all the Parker stuff. I mean,
and the Spirit. He did the Spirit.
Yeah. Oh man, dude, yeah, so much good stuff.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned Archie Goodwin quite a few times. I wanted to ask. You said he was your mentor in the industry. I want to know what, like, some of the best advice or some of the coolest things that you learned from him.
Yeah, I just being around him, he was so sweet and funny. He was the funniest guy. One of my absolute favorite writers. I don't know if you know the old Creepy and Eerie black and white books that Warren used to put. He wrote it. He wrote all the great stories for that. The greatest editor. I mean, the guy just was. Yeah, I don't even know what to say about him. He was just such a lovely person and so brilliant, very humble. I think we could use a little more humility in the creative arts, but yeah, I was just lucky. Well, I mean, the one lesson that I always remembered, it was always in the front of my head when I edited, was Archie said, "What you do is you hire the best guys and gals you can find, the very best people, talent you can find, and leave them alone. Don't tell Mike Mignola how to spot blacks. Don't tell Tim Sale how to tell a story. They know what they're doing. They're going to make you look good." And man, I stole that advice and used it every day.
Yeah, that is awesome advice. I want to jump into this, what you're currently doing. I know you said you're doing illustration again. I was wondering, one, what your favorite medium to work in is in terms of with your art, and then also if you can tell us if there's what projects are you currently working on that we can be on the lookout
Sure,
for.
sure. For medium, I'm kind of schizophrenic. I work in all different mediums. I really like watercolor quite a bit. I did a book on I'm a real big baseball fan. I did a book on the Negro Leagues years
Right.
ago. Were all watercolor portraits of Satchel Paige and those guys. But I just did a book that came out 2 months ago, again about baseball, and that's all line drawings. I mean, brush drawings. Like Pentel makes this black pen, and it's got a cartridge, an ink cartridge in it, and it gives a really lush, brushy line.
Mhm.
And what I do is I draw with it on watercolor paper, which is kind of bumpy.
Right.
So you get a really chunky, clunky. It's not a smooth line. It's got a lot of character to it. So
Nice.
I did these baseball drawings. When I would come home from work from DC, I'd be exhausted, but every night, every other night, I would do a drawing of a baseball player. And after 3 years, 4 years, I had 100 drawings of baseball players. So I figured, well, everybody's doing this Kickstarter thing. Let me see if I can do that. And I did, and it came out 2 months ago, and it sold out immediately, which was pretty cool. I should have printed more, but of course I didn't. But yeah, so that was a really fun project. It was a really fun project. I'm doing some comics work. I'm doing some covers for Aftershock. Mike Martz is the editor at Aftershock. Great editor. Those are real fun. That's gangster stuff, Al Capone and gangster stuff.
Cool.
I had lined up a project at IDW, and they really wanted to do it, and then unfortunately, I ran into a bad editor, and he kind of fucked me on it, and I am pretty upset about that. But mainly because it was a project I pitched, and they said they wanted to do really badly, and it just didn't happen, unfortunately. But I'm talking with Marvel about doing something. I'm talking with DC about doing something. I just started a children's book, which is fun, not comics. It's something I've always wanted to do. I mean, I collect children's books. That's really fun because that's for real little kids, like kids who are just starting to read.
Oh, cool. That's
yeah.
awesome. Well, how are you going to launch that? Can you talk a little bit about that?
With the baseball book, with oh, here's a copy. With Baseball 100, I had a publisher wanted to do it, but I wanted to try Kickstarter. I wanted to control every aspect of it, and I'm glad I did. I will never do it again because
A lot of work.
Oh my God, the amount of work. Like every aspect of it, the printer, the mailing, everything. So for this one, I have a mainstream publisher that wants to do the children's book with me. So no more Kickstarter. I'm gonna do it with them.
And when can we be, well, for me personally, because my daughter's learning to read, so I'm kind of interested on a personal level. When can we expect that book to come out?
Well, it's all about monsters, so it'll probably come out not 2021 Halloween, but 2022 Halloween.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But that's fun. And I'm doing a lot of non-comics illustration. I do stuff for the Criterion movie collection.
And, oh, cool. That's awesome, man. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I did a Charlie Chaplin one recently. That was really fun. And I'm doing some stuff for Mondo, the print guys. Really cool people to work with. But so I'm sort of all over the place. I think I have to kind of be the adult now and figure out, okay, you got all these offers. What do you want to pick? Just sit down and draw something.
Yeah, I mean, you sound super busy with all those things going on, for sure.
Yeah, very much so.
Okay, well, before we get out of here, I just want to ask a couple more questions. I was curious, what books or creators are you currently following that you're really excited about right now?
Man, I haven't been to the comic shop in a full year. Again, I'm very art driven. So it's usually artists that appeal to me. Um, somebody, I was just talking to a friend and he said, yeah, comic book artists, there's no good comic book artists anymore. And I was like, what are you talking about? Man, there's great comic book artists now. I love Greg Ticini stuff. Um, People from my generation who are still working, Tim Sale and Adam Hughes is better than he ever was. Anytime Dave Johnson does a cover, it's so great. I'll see Josh Middleton stuff, but
his stuff is crazy. His stuff is out.
There's so many good artists out there. I mean, Lee Weeks, I die every time Lee Weeks does something. There's a lot. Jorge Jimenez is drawn stuff. Otto Schmidt is a young guy he's killing it, man. There was a really cool, I can't remember the guy's name, but there was a really cool Silver Surfer series from Marvel last year. It was
Silver Surfer Black?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was Trad Moore. That was the guy I was mentioning, drew a Batman story in
okay.
White, which, his style is, it's like he's on acid or something. I don't know what this dude is on when.
I know.
I'm sure he's not, I'm not sure, but it's just out of this world. It's unlike, there's so much going on, and I think he colors his stuff too. I could be wrong.
He must, yeah. I have those issues in my studio. They're beautiful, and I apologize for not remembering his name.
That's all good.
But the style, I'm really influenced by psychedelic art from the 60s, late 60s and early 70s. I'm a real big fan of, DC used to publish romance comics, and they were always really boring. And then the 60s hit in the early 70s. And man, they had guys like Rick Estrada and Alex Toth doing this real hippie shit, this cool. There was an illustrator named Bob Peak who did a lot of Sports Illustrated and TV Guide covers, a lot of movie posters. He did that same style, and man, I love that stuff.
Yeah, same here. I'm a huge fan of that kind of stuff. And then I wanted to ask as well, what would be the best piece of advice you would give someone that wants to work in comics?
Two things. One's real obvious. If you want to draw comics, you got to draw all the time. I wish I were a better draftsperson. I look at, I talk about Adam Hughes often. Man, look at Bill Sienkiewicz. These guys can draw. They're not, look, every time I sit down to draw something, if I draw Spider-Man, I got to figure out, well, how's an elbow work? I got to draw, how's the rib cage work? These guys know how it works. They can, because they've done 10,000 drawings, at least, they could sit down and they have that base from which to spring. They can draw, like Mobius. Mobius can draw. So when he sits down, he can be totally creative. So, I tell everybody, just keep drawing, even if keep a sketchbook. But one mistake every artist makes is they keep a sketchbook, but they're kind of tentative in it because they're going to show it to their girlfriend or their brother or their friend down the street or their fellow artist. Don't ever show your sketchbook to anybody. That's not what it's for. Your sketchbook is to fuck up in. It's to practice drawing that hand 20 times. You're not going to publish this thing. You're going to use it to learn from. The other advice about comics is there's other jobs. Like if you want to be a writer or an artist, there are other jobs at Marvel and DC and Dark Horse and IDW. Work in the bullpen doing lettering corrections. Get a job as an assistant editor. You get your foot in the door, and that's what I did. I got into Marvel, and it all worked out pretty well for me.
That's kind of what I was leading. I want to do editing because I'm not an artist. I kind of write a little bit, but not too much. But I think I'd be a good editor. So I was kind of curious about the editing side too, about advice on that.
And editing leads to a lot of things. I'm sure you watch Netflix and Amazon Prime all day long, right? Because you're an intelligent guy and you're probably looking at the structure of the story. Well, why did they have this character do that?
Right.
I grew up, like I said, I grew up watching television 23 hours a day. It wasn't a waste of my time. I figured, I learned story structure from watching, you know, the Mary Tyler Moore Show.
Yeah. I want to thank you again for taking the time out. It has been a privilege and an honor to be able to chat with you today. Before we leave, if you could just share where we can find you online, and I will throw those links down below as well.
Oh, cool, Ryan. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
My website is markchiarello.com, and I have an Instagram page that I can't remember what it's called.
I'll find it.
I don't know how that shit works. I just, you know, I'll just put up a drawing, and I'm not a tech guy, you know. But yeah, those are out there. And you know, and again, this was fun. I'm kind of a quiet guy, and I don't like doing interviews, but a good friend of mine said, "No, dude, if Ryan asked you, do it. It's cool."
Oh, cool. That's awesome. I'm kind of curious who the friend was. But either way, thank you so much. And I really enjoyed our chat today because, you know, I don't get a chance often to talk to people that do like art directing, editing. So when I can and I get that chance, I always like to take the opportunity. So thank you so much. And I would love to do this again. You know, if you have when you have an upcoming project, help you promote that and get the word out.
That'd be great. I mean, you know, I'm going to be doing Spider-Man down the road, so I'd love to do it then.
All right. Awesome, man. Well, thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Ryan. Stay safe.
All right. You too.